I really have a soft spot for all these thin and light machines, whether they're gaming or not, They just feel so darn sexy. This is the MSI GS66 Stealth, a really sleek and sexy looking gaming laptop from MSI that has balls to the wall specs, especially if you plan to do any gaming or productivity work, and, well, to not much surprise, it packs a price tag to match that oomph as well. So, is the MSI GS66 Stealth worth your money? How well does it actually perform? Are there things that you should know of before you commit a huge chunk of change for one of these? Well, let's find out with a deep dive into the MSI GS66 Stealth. So some of you may remember that in my previous video, I took a look at the Iligear Ares X, with that machine being more of a no-frills desktop replacement. Well, what if you still wanted to move around and have something portable? Here's where the MSI GS66 Stealth steps in, delivering a lot of that power and performance in a slimmer body. A slimmer chassis does mean that somewhere at some point concessions must be made though, and as such we don't get a desktop chip here, but rather a more normal but still powerful Intel Core i9-10980HK, 32GB of total system RAM, an Nvidia RTX 2080 Super Max Q, a 2TB Samsung NVMe SSD, a 15.6-inch 300Hz IPS display, Wi-Fi 6 and a 99.9 Wh battery. The power brick is equally as portable at 920 grams, is 230 watts, made by Chickeny, and the laptop is pretty thin, sleek and light, coming in at 358.3mm wide, 248mm deep, and at its thickest 19.8mm off the table, and all of that is in a package that weighs just 2.18 kilograms. Being thin and sexy is absolutely great, but it does concern me in one department: cooling. Tearing the laptop down isn't really all that simple, because after you remove the screws from the bottom, it's still pretty difficult to pop off the rear cover. I started from the rear hinges using 2 plastic pry tools and slowly worked my way around the lid. Absolutely do not use any metal tools unless you want some pretty ugly dents and nicks on your laptop. With the lid off, we get a good look at the absolute crisscross of heat pipes, with a total of 7 of them running all over the CPU and GPU quad vents, and surprisingly for me, 3 fans, 2 on the left and 1 on the right. Given the fans and the heat pipes, I'm pretty sure that the side with the double fans is the one with the RTX 2080 Super. Aside from those, we see the 2 RAM slots, the 2 PCIe slots, one which is already in use, and of course, the Wi-Fi chip. Moving on to the ports, over on the left, the barrel charging port, a Type-C Thunderbolt 3 port that also supports USB 3.0 10GB, DisplayPort out and power delivery charging, a full-sized HDMI port, a USB 3.0 10GB port, and a little charging light. As for the right, a headphone microphone combo jack, a 10GB USB-C port, 2 10GB USB-A ports, and a killer 2.5GB per second Ethernet port. Always nice to see one of these. It sadly lacks a card reader, but oh well, what can you do? The GS66 Stealth passes my one-handed opening test with flying colors. If you decide to open it all the way, you can lay it completely flat. Not sure what you'd need this for. And with the laptop open, we get a first look at that 15.6-inch IPS level display from AU Optronics, the AU0328E. And this sucker goes all the way to 300Hz, which is just crazy. And I would have loved to also see some adaptive sync technology here, but unfortunately, there is none. Outdoor use is not too bad, but obviously you're going to want to stay away from extremely harsh sunlight, and the colors kinda look a bit off, as if the contrast was a tad high, with greens looking pretty saturated and neon-like, and my chats on Messenger I find lack the contrast that I'm used to, with the text looking lighter than usual. But the good news is that I managed to remedy that at least a little bit by setting the contrast in MSI True Color to about -15 under gamer mode. The webcam has a privacy light that comes on whenever it's in use.
And while the microphone and video quality for the webcam are actually not too bad, you can probably hear that really annoying buzzing noise in the background right now, and that noise is actually coming from the fans of this laptop. And here's the thing, those fans aren't even audible in real life right now. Like, I can't hear those fans, but because of how this laptop is designed and how close I guess that microphone is to the fans of the laptop, you can hear it so loudly, and it's really bad and really annoying. But there is the MSI Dragon Center's microphone noise cancellation, which you can hear I turned on right now, and that kind of fixes the issue. But to me, you know, hardware design flaw. This is a hardware design flaw, and software shouldn't be used to fix a hardware design flaw. And I've never reviewed a single MSI laptop which has these kinds of issues before, so I don't think I can accept it.
There's even more vents here, one whole row of it in fact, right above the keyboard. And as per MSI laptops, the keyboard is made by SteelSeries. Its RGB is really nice to type on with great feedback and pretty light actuation force. And amusingly, you know how normal keyboards have that notch on the F and the J key for touch typists to kind of find and, quickly orientate themselves? Yeah, you get one for the W key here, and I find that to be a little bit of a cool little gamery touch. Just like other MSI laptops that I've reviewed in the past, it also has a second backslash key right down the bottom, which is kind of weird. I'm still not sure what this is for. The FN shortcut keys allow for one-handed adjustments of brightness and volume, which is really nice. And aside from the usual FN functions, you get some other really interesting and bizarre ones, like the G key to launch the Dragon Center, quickly set the fans of the laptop to turbo, the SteelSeries logo to change the RGB profile, and the crosshair to put a giant crosshair on your screen. Like, what? Honestly, I have no idea what this is for, but I just found it super amusing. I mean, if you guys know what this is for, let me know down in the comments section below. The touchpad is super wide and smooth with really nice tactile feedback. And overall, the laptop is mostly made of this black matte metal finish, which unfortunately together with the keyboard area are a bit prone to oil marks and stains. But in terms of looks, I really dig these kinds of designs as they look very, MacBook, Razer Blade-esque, and not over the top and loud with flashy colors, just a little bit more classy, stealthy look, you know what I mean? Maybe that's why it's called the GS66 Stealth. We move on to actually using the laptop and starting off first with the pre-installed applications. As with all the MSI laptops that I've tested, you get a slew of pre-installed apps from Cyberlink, as well as Music Maker Jam and Nahimic, where you can tune the audio of the laptop with equalizers and, virtual environments and the such. With MSI App Player, you can run a virtualized Android environment to play your favorite Android games on the laptop. And Dragon Center is where you can enable things like game mode, change the power profiles, change some general settings, check the usage and temperatures of the laptop, set the display color profiles, record your game highlights if you download the companion app, mess around with Mystic lighting if you have other MSI peripherals, enable noise cancellation for the speakers and microphone, and yeah, that's pretty cool. The only thing different this time around is that we have a killer control center to manage the network interfaces on this device. And this app is actually pretty cool as you can actually set priority levels and limits for individual apps, as well as monitor traffic usage, get some information as to the network optimizations made by Killer, view and analyze existing Wi-Fi connections around you, connect to the GameFast service when gaming for a smoother connection, and even have your laptop work as a Wi-Fi extender to boost an existing Wi-Fi signal for maybe, your phone or another machine. And how cool is that? And it also comes with Norton built in, so yeah, that's less cool. Before we move on to the benchmarks, I want to quickly say that there are 4 main power profiles in this laptop, and I benchmarked and tested all 4 profiles. We start off first with the Cinebench R20 scores, where honestly, the results were a lot lower than what I expected out of this Core i9 processor. While it is still quite, respectable, it still loses out to a Ryzen 7 4800H that is running at just 45 watts. We see a very similar story in the Blender BMW benchmark where a mobile Core i9 is seriously no longer the best in terms of productivity. To get a better understanding of the relationship between the profiles, the cooling and the processor, I logged and graphed the data, and in terms of clock speeds, we can see that the 10980HK hits a maximum of about 4.3 GHz, although only for a split second under the extreme performance profile, before it settled at about 3.3. Balanced is pretty much consistently at 3 GHz, which is really interesting. Silent starts at 3 GHz before it settles to about 2.5. And Super Battery, that pretty much ran consistently at about 900 MHz, which is really low. In terms of power draw, Extreme Performance peaks at about 126 watts before roughly settling at about 58. Balanced is almost consistent at about 45 watts. Silent starts at 45 before settling at about 30. I'm pretty sure you guys can start to slowly see a pattern by now. And Battery Saver is consistently at about 10 watts, which is super low. As for temperatures, it's just wow. We can see what caused these steep drops in clocks and power in Extreme Performance, as it's pretty much pegged at about 95 Celsius before settling to about 90, which is still super high. The balanced profile pretty much slowly makes its way to about 80 Celsius, Silent hits about 72 near the end, and Super Battery ended at about 54 Celsius, which is super cool, but it's not surprising given the only 10 watt of power draw. In the end, only the Extreme Performance profile logged any form of thermal throttling. Benchmarking the GPU performance with all profiles in Crytek's Neo-Noir benchmark, interestingly enough, they all performed pretty much identically except for Super Battery, which I suspect has some bottlenecking happening due to the CPU only running at 10 watts. This is because in Unigine Superposition, the scores were pretty much identical, which maybe tells me that while Superposition doesn't really care for your CPU speed, Neo-Noir uses a bit more of it. We can see this quite clearly when the GPU clock is plotted out, where all four profiles pretty much run at nearly identical clock speeds of about 1300 MHz the entire time, with maybe the only visible difference being the temperatures that they run at, because Silent doesn't ramp up the fans at all, causing the temperatures to get a bit higher. Speaking of Silent, the fans are definitely a bit audible even on normal use. Under auto, it's definitely more pronounced. And it's only when you max out the fans that they can get a bit loud. Now, gaming is where things get really interesting with this laptop, and I'll get into the reasons as to why in just a bit. To not much surprise, under the Extreme Performance and Balanced profiles, the CPU got really hot, running constantly at about 95 degrees Celsius, where the cooling was seriously struggling to keep the i9 and the 2080 Super both cool at the same time, and this is reflected by the surface temperatures of the laptop when gaming under these profiles, getting quite a bit warm and uncomfortable over time. Silent mode was a bit cooler for the CPU, but due to the lack of any fan activity, I found that it heated up the keyboard area even faster, and while Super Battery's temperatures were quite alright, comparatively it ran at a lower FPS. This is where things got interesting for me, because notice that in all modes, except for Super Battery of course, the FPS was nearly identical from Extreme Performance all the way to Silent mode. Except that Silent mode is running at only 30 watts of power consumption for the CPU, and it's technically lower in terms of temperatures, but also remember that it's running at a much lower fan profile than the rest. So, what happens if you stick the laptop in Silent mode to let the CPU run at only 30 watts when gaming and max out the fans? Well, I did just that by pressing the Fn and F8 key, and I started to get temperatures that hovered around the 70 degrees mark, occasionally hitting 80, and get this, all at the very same FPS and experience of gaming on either Extreme Performance or the Balanced mode, aka smooth gameplay with absolutely no stutter. Okay, no, that's a bit of a lie, it's not exactly identical, because there was one big key difference. Because the CPU was now running a lot cooler over extended gaming periods, my fingers and hands felt a lot cooler, and I didn't feel like I was trying to touch a warm frying pan. I further benchmarked this configuration in Total War Troy, where everything looked to be exactly the same between the two, except for cooler CPU and GPU temperatures, and in the Shadow of the Tomb Raider benchmark, where we saw almost exactly the same thing with my Silent Max fan mode, giving identical FPS with noticeably less heat. Both Insurgency and Doom Eternal lack any form of in-game benchmarking, but they both ran really well under this custom preset of mine with identical performance, and I could game for much longer without feeling uncomfortable. But here's what you might be thinking. Why not use the user mode and choose the option that lets you set the CPU to about 30 watts and just, choose a high fan profile from there? Well, for whatever reason, none of the options there allow you to run the CPU at 30 watts. It's either higher than 45 or just 10, and so the only way to get 30 watts in this system is to run it in silent mode, and in order to also get some cooling on it, to max out the fans, you have to use the keyboard combination of FN and F8. I seriously have no idea why they would give what looks like granularity to the end user, but pretty much have all the CPU speeds run roughly about the same. Anyway, yeah, my rambling aside, the 300Hz panel delivered some smooth gameplay, but honestly, this laptop doesn't even come near delivering 300 FPS in games. Maybe with esports titles, but in everything else, you're only gonna get about 100 FPS, sometimes more, sometimes less, and so maybe I set my expectations a bit high when I saw a RTX 2080 Super in here, but I can't say that I'm particularly blown away with the numbers. Both speakers are top firing on the laptop, and I kinda expected them to sound a bit better as well, but in the end they just feel like normal gaming laptop speakers, which is a bit disappointing. Also, while I like top-firing speakers, I don't like their placement on this laptop. Too many times when I'm gaming or just typing, my left hand will cover the speaker port, which just muffles the speaker, and that's kinda annoying. Finally, maybe it's because of the 10980HK inside of this, but in terms of battery life, despite having a large 99.9 Wh battery, under my workload of typing this review up on it and listening to some EDM on YouTube under the balanced profile, I only managed to get about 4 hours of runtime before the laptop shut itself down. It took about 2 hours to charge the laptop back again to full. And I mean, 4 hours is pretty disappointing for a laptop that packs a 99.9 Wh battery, because you're just 0.1 Wh away from the legal limit allowed to be carried onto a plane. Remember those things? And you can't even last a plane ride to, I don't know, maybe like Asia to Australia? That's just kinda sad. Let's get into the conclusions with the MSI GS66 Stealth, and I think that I want to start by talking about the price of it. The variant that I have here with me is the 10SGS, and it costs a cool 15 grand here in Malaysia, and that's about the equivalent of $3,660 US. That is honestly a lot of money, and if let's say that money got you a machine with like no compromises, or everything worked really well and it had great performance and just a great experience, then maybe it would be worth that amount of money. But in my honest opinion, I don't think that this laptop fulfills that criteria. Don't get me wrong, there are things that I like about this laptop, like the keyboard and the design and the touchpad, but everything else just kind of fell short of expectations. The laptop gets hot like really easily. The performance just leaves a lot to be desired. The battery life is kind of sad, and I don't feel that at that price you're justifying this experience. Because of that, I cannot give a straight outward recommendation for this laptop, or at least this model, as I think that the GS66 Stealth 10SE may be a better option, as it comes with a 10750H and RTX 2060 that are more suited for the cooling potential on a chassis like this, and at a price point that is almost half of this 10SGS, I believe that that model is not only better in terms of price to performance, but is also more balanced in its configuration. Anyway, that's the end of the review. If you'd like to get one for yourself, you can find the links for that down in the description below. Do the usual YouTube thing of giving this video a like if you liked it, sharing it, dropping any comments down below, consider subscribing to me, and if you're already subscribed, thank you. Click the bell icon so that you don't miss any of my future videos as soon as they come out. My name is Yang, the Tech Rodent, and well, I wonder if MSI is still going to bother sending me machines to review after this. I'll catch you guys in the next video.